If not, I'll just log out and come back in.
Can you see it?
Looks good. Thank you, sir.
All right. Okay. We looked at Alan Heyer's arguments, and his argument was a good, sound argument, or at least it was logically valid. I believe it was sound also. We looked at last week, and he had one or two words left out, but we won't call that an unsound argument because we could add a word or two to it and have it sound. That's good enough as far as I'm concerned. I like to have mine precise, but I don't fault him for that. Okay. Blakely's argument here, we wanted to look at that, and one of the assignments was to look at that this week. I have some other sources. We'll be trying to look and spend another week or two on looking at some more arguments. We could easily spend several weeks on this. I hope what we do is we get to where we can look at one quickly and get through it pretty quickly. This argument here, Blakely's basic argument, we have his first premise, his second premise, and his third premise. So let me point out, people who write arguments don't always put them in precise form like this. Alan Heyer's did. He's a logical thinker, and he put his in precise form. Major premise first, minor premise conclusion, and that was his argument, basic argument. And right here, Blakely's basic argument. Now he argues all actions or actions employed in Christian worship are acts of worship without spiritual authority. Actions or acts or actions which are nevertheless acceptable to God. In other words, you don't have to have scriptural authority for it. Okay. The use of mechanical instruments of music in Christian worship is an act or action without scriptural authority. He admits that. Therefore, the use of mechanical instruments is nevertheless acceptable to God. Now then, let's look at this. What we need to do is we need to figure out remember there's three parts to his argument. When you look at it, there are three basic parts to an argument. And you remember what those were?
Major premise, minor premise, conclusion.
Yes. And so our problem is in each premise, we have three parts, and there's three terms, all right? And so our major premise will have a major term, and it will contain the middle term. The minor premise will contain the minor term, and it will contain the middle term. And the conclusion contains the minor term and the major term. You want to remember that? So these are your forms of them. And then we had some rules to make them valid. So now let's look at the conclusion. The first part, the predicate of the conclusion is the word after the word is. So we'll put our mouse across it, that right there. That's your predicate. Now your predicate is your major term. So approved for praising God today. That's his major term. So we should be able to find that up in the major premise. All right, he has it, is approved for praising God today. Okay, so he has it up there, approved for praising God today. You want to see that? That's his major term. So far, it's good. All right, instrumental music, and that is your minor term. And so it should be in the minor premise, instrumental music. And the word was is your linking verb. Okay. Instead of is, it's was. So that's certainly true. So what type of premise is this? What is the middle term now? Let's see what about the middle term. Whatever was used in praising God is approved. All right. Used in praising God, was used in praising God in the Old Testament. right, in the Old Testament. So he's appealing to the Old Testament. And so instrumental music was used, and so they're in praising God in the Old Testament. So we know it's middle term now. Any questions? All right. Now,
I'll interject with a question. Where it has as acts or actions of worship, what value does that provide in this? When you went through that a little earlier, I thought that if you just left it out, what's the impact of putting that in? It's a simile, is it not?
well, he used it, and you're back to Blakely. I'm
Yes, sir.
on Blakely's second argument, not on his first. I'm sorry, I got off on the second argument. Okay, what did I do here? I got down here on this one. Let me go back up here. The middle term, I'm down here on this argument here instead of the other one. I need to go back up. Okay, I'm
Yes, yes, sir. I followed that you did. You moved on to that, but
sorry.
okay, never mind. Go ahead.
All right. Well, let's look at his middle term. An act or action without scriptural authority. Acts or actions employed in Christian worship are acts without scriptural authority. So all acts or actions in worship. So right here, his middle term here, without scriptural authority, that's his middle term. Okay.
I would say he's begging the question with the middle term.
Yeah, his term up here is not exactly the same, and we need to look at it and see, because if you're in a debate here, you got to now, okay, now what's he trying to sneak in here? This is not exactly the same wording, act or action without scriptural authority. So it looks like he's committed the fallacy of four terms. In other words, we have this term here is different than the so-called middle, what would be the middle term down here. And I think that may be what you're pointing out for us, James. All right. Act or action.
Yes, sir.
And acts of action without scriptural authority. See, he's added in employed in Christian worship. He's added that in. All right. But he doesn't have it down here in his middle term down here. All right. And acts or action without scriptural authority. So his middle, what he calls what should be his middle term here is not the same as his middle term up here. Does that make sense? And so they're different. And he adds more information in to this one in the major premise, number one. So that's something we really need to look at carefully and see if what he's trying to sneak by. Is he just doing it because if you debate someone, some people are just honestly mistaken, okay? But sometimes they're what I call, they're slick, okay? And they're sophists, S-O-P-H-I-S-T-S, they're sophists. And they use what looks like an argument, but it's fallacious. And they know it's fallacious, but they use it anyhow to prove their case. So I don't know whether Blakely's a sophist or whether he's just not very good at constructing his arguments. But we have to look at this. Acts or actions employed in Christian worship as acts of worship or actions of worship without scriptural authority. And then he says this is without scriptural authority. So,
How does he get away? How does he get away with saying that acts or actions of anything in Christian worship without scriptural authority is nevertheless acceptable to God?
Well,
I mean,
that's what he teaches.
Oh, well, yeah, of course.
He's affirming what he teaches. Now, if you have a copy of this debate, and I would say one of the best ways to learn stuff is to read debate books, because they usually put their best foot forward in their arguments. And Brother Hires did a real good job in this debate. It's if you can get the book, it's worthy of studying. Okay, I have it in my library, but and I've been through it. But Brother Hires dealt with him in good form or good order. But right here, what James is pointing out, his middle term is not the same. And there's a fallacy when you do that, when you add information in there. It's called a fallacy of four terms. This becomes another term in here, and you can't have four terms in an argument, right? And I want to see what he's trying to get in, and we really need to get in the debate, see if Brother Hires figured out what he was doing. Brother Hires is real sharp, and I figured he might have figured out what he was doing. Okay. We need to stop and think about it here, what he's trying to do. And I haven't looked the debate over just lately. Right? I don't know if I can got you a good answer there, James, but he definitely doesn't have the same, his middle term is not the same. Right?
No, that's fine. Thank you. Appreciate your addressing it.
Okay. So I don't like his middle term, and I think there's a call to look it over real carefully. Now, if you were in a debate, an oral debate, you'd have to look it over pretty quickly. Okay, you got to do that quickly. All right. Actions employed in Christian worship. See, now he doesn't deal with it. And he says Christian worship, we don't have to have authority for it. God's going to accept whatever we do. God, you have to take what I want to give you as worship. Boy, that's not the case. God's not in the taking. He's the one that decides. All right. Any questions?
Like we looked at Matthew 21, is it from God or men? And also Colossians 3:17. So that totally defeats his argument, his premise.
Yeah, I agree. There's another thing that would defeat this argument. Let me point out. The New Testament is a diatheke covenant. For those that have had Greek, I'll do this. I think that's correct. And also, when I look at it, I'll see.
Diatheke.
Diatheke. Is that an A here?
I thought it was Eta Kappa Eta.
Eta Kappa Eta. Yeah, I think it is. Yeah, diatheke. Diatheke covenant. And a diatheke covenant, the one that gives the instructions, you can't barter with him. There's no bartering with him. A suntheke covenant, and it would be a suntheke, and it would be soon. A suntheke covenant would be one where you could barter with them. But the New Testament is a diatheke covenant. So there's no bartering with God. It's a take it or leave it. I want to give you the greatest thing you could ever dream of, but you got to go by my rules. That's what God's saying. Does that help? And Shane, your arguments are good. I'm not knocking them. I'm just saying that there's several ways you could attack this problem. Okay. Any questions? All right. Let's look at what is it? An AAA or AII or what is it? The first one is an A type, AI. It's an A type. So we got an A. All right, we got an A type. I'll put an A there. And what do you have down here? I think it's an I. Okay. And so this would have to be an I. And if we look at it, we get it also. So it's an AII. And let's go back up. Oh, let me do this. Rules. I'd have to go out. I have to go out of it. Have to go out of it. Do you remember the rules? It's an AII, and what figure is it? Do you have your figure material out? So we won't go to it. So we'll take time to go to it. It's figure 1, 2, or 3, or 4. Look at where your middle term is. That's how you tell. Middle term is the first part of the premise, major premise, first premise, and it's the second part of the second premise, and that's what we have here. That will be figure 1. And so if we go to our table as to which ones are valid, and that's on page that is on page 48 in your book. The AAA, EAE, AII, and EIO are all valid in figure 1. Is that clear? One okay with that? So it's valid, but he may have committed what's called the fallacy of 4 terms, which we might need to go back and look at that. That would be something we could bring back up on the fallacy of 4 terms when we get to it in the logic, in the fallacies chapter, okay? Let's take the next one. That was his basic argument. Let's look at his conclusion and see if we can get to the subject of the conclusion is that which goes before is, and that is your what? What term is that? Major term, minor term, or middle term?
The highlighted one,
Yes,
minor term.
it's the minor term because it's also in the minor premise. And so instrumental music. So his minor term is laid out for us. There it is, before the word is and before the word was, okay? All right. And so after the word is, the predicate of the conclusion is what term?
Major term.
So it should be in the major premise, right? And so here, approved for praising God today. Is approved for praising God today. So that's correct. So that's valid so far. Okay. His middle term is what? Should be was used in praising God in the Old Testament. Was used for praising God in the Old, let's just say it used for praising God in the Old Testament. Used in praising God in the Old Testament. Didn't you not? You know he's going to use that argument, didn't you? Okay. Okay.
So what's interesting is the minor premise is true, but the major premise is not sound. So
you have to attack the premise somehow. So if you were Brother Hires, Brother Hires probably did this. I can't remember. I haven't looked the debate over in several years, but I'd almost guarantee you, Brother Hires was real sharp, that he attacked that major premise. Okay, you can't deny the minor premise. Does that make sense? It's true. Now, some of our brethren have denied it in the past. And they appeal to
Amos,
I think it is, and making themselves instruments of music like unto David. But other passages tell us that the instruments were introduced by God, by the commandment of God. Okay, and so God did it. And let me point out something here. I have toyed with this. I haven't developed it, and I don't know that it can be developed. But I know this in the Old Testament, that God miraculously caused men to be able to make the various things that were used in the temple and the tabernacle by miraculous guidance. It is entirely possible that God miraculously guided men to make the instruments that they use in the worship. In other words, the various musical instruments were actually made by men guided by the Holy Spirit to make them. And so this, certainly if that's true, then it might be that this would nullify, because we don't have instruments that were made by God's direction. Yeah. But whatever the case, we have a situation here where it's two different covenants, isn't it? So so that's where you get into the major premise and attack it. Now let's look at our, if you will, do you have your square of opposition chart out? Everyone have it? Hopefully you do. You printed it. So what premise would falsify or contradict that major premise of his? All things, whatever is all things, was used, all things that were used in praising God in the Old Testament are approved for praising God today. That's what he's saying. How would you falsify it? I would take, you'd have to look at your square of opposition. I'm gonna have to go to the chart, and it's because nobody's responding here. Right.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right. I'm gonna minimize it.
Some S are not in. Oh,
I got out.
Yeah, I think it.
Okay, the O type proposition.
Yeah.
So you need to find something that was used in praising God that he wouldn't approve of today. If there's one thing that was used in praising God in the Old Testament that's not approved today, then he falsified his premise.
Dancing, for example.
How about animal sacrifices, incense, and so forth? He has to allow incense, has to allow animal sacrifices. We go on and on.
Dancing.
Yeah.
Having to wash yourself before you come into the temple or the place of worship.
Yeah. We could add any of those things, just lay them all out. And that has contradicted that premise. That premise was contradicted right there.
Just go back to that old saying, whatever proves too much proves nothing.
Yep. Yes, that's true.
Ayers did use in the debate dance, burning of incense, and burnt offerings.
Okay. So you have the debate?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I know it's on YouTube. They got the video of it.
Oh, okay. Well, that's even better, because Brother Ayers was a powerful debater. I'll say that for him. Okay. Okay. He was very good, very sharp. Okay. All right. So we falsified his major premise. So we see how to falsify it. Okay. An O-type proposition would contradict it. Now, you could contradict it or be contrary to it, because remember, your A and E-type proposition, according to square of opposition, cannot both be true. So if we make this one true, it cannot be true that no acts of praising God in the Old Testament were approved of praising God today. All right. All right. And of course, that's not true either. Okay. So what we got is some actions of praising God are approved in the Old Testament are approved today. Some actions are not. Does that make sense? So we go back. I need to get out of this right here and go over to it. Okay. I want to do that. I want to get out, go to square of opposition. I'm the rules. That's what I want, the rules. All right. Go back to the square of opposition. There it is. Can you see it?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes.
So we got an A-type proposition here. And all S are in. And the O will contradict it. And so we just found some, and you say Brother Hires had 3 points he brought up contradicting it. See, so he knew, he understood this is what contradicts it. Now then, we could say contraries both cannot both be true. This can't be true. The A and the E can't both be true. One of them could be true and the other false. Or they could both be false, but they can't both be true. Now then, we come down here, some things used in the Old Testament for praising God are also used today. Now, what can you think of? Well, I can think prayer, used for praising God, and they sang, but they did sing without instruments before at one time, and so singing was used, praying was used, and so I would say yes, there are some things that are not used today, and there are some things that are. And of course, we don't have a problem there. So if he brought up, well, look, he said praying was used to praise God. I said, no problem, because it doesn't contradict my proposition, my point, because it's an I-type proposition, and it won't contradict the idea of burning incense and so forth. Does that make sense? Both could be true, because they're subcontraries. Does that help us?
Mm-hmm.
We don't have a problem there. Right? No other further questions? Want to get out of this one and go back to it. All right. Gotta stop sharing. Go back. And we're going to go back to exercises again. Here we are. Are we back to it now?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So we've answered him, and okay, he was answered by Brother Hires as well. Okay, everyone okay with that? So Brother Hires answered it the way we figured out you had to answer it now. Okay. All right. Now, if you were having a debate, what you ought to do is find someone that can reason quite well with you and bounce your arguments off your friend back and forth. You can do this with internet real easily. Bounce them back and forth and see if your friend can find flaws in it before you present them out there in the debate. And the old preachers used to get together and just debate. They would just get together, 2 preachers, maybe 4 or 5 or 6 preachers get together and just listen. They just go back and forth and see how the arguments could be answered. Okay, because you want to be sure you have the truth. Because all we're concerned about is truth. That's all I'm concerned about. To me, winning a debate's not important. The truth wins is what's important. All right, let's go to the second argument. All right. Let's see, what is his minor term?
Gives Christians freedom of action. Oh, I mean, sorry, worship of his conduct, which is unregulated by the scriptures.
Worship, all right, his conduct, and which gives, okay, I'm going to say worship his conduct, but I think that's what he has, okay? All right. All right. So we have it up here, worship his conduct. And of course, he has which, okay? Any question there? All right. What about your major term? What is it?
Conduct which is unregulated by the scriptures.
Gives Christians freedom of action? Is that what he has? It's a,
Mhm.
Yes.
it's a predicate of your conclusion. So it's right here. Gives Christians freedom of action. Right? So right there. And so that's in your major premise. That's your predicate. That's in the right spot. Now, what's your middle term? It's what's left over, isn't it? Okay. Conduct which is unregulated by scriptures is, okay.
Yeah, but when you get into that minor premise, he slips in the word worship, which he doesn't include in the major.
Yep. So what he's done, he's committed the fallacy of four terms because he snuck it in there. Okay. And that's a fallacy. All right. So what he should have. No, I say, no, he hasn't. Conduct which is unregulated. He had worship here in his minor term. Conduct which is unregulated by the scriptures there. He's okay.
Okay.
Yeah, he's okay. So now, how are we going to answer it?
It's the middle term.
That's your middle term right there.
Minor premise is not sound.
Yeah.
What about the major premise?
I would also attack that too.
I think both of them can be attacked. Okay, if it's unregulated, then I can prove it's regulated. How can I prove it's regulated?
1 Corinthians 14, let all things be done decently and in order. And
Okay. That'll work. But how about, let's just offer human sacrifice.
Thou shalt not commit murder.
It's unregulated. Yeah, you see, now then it is regulated. Now it's not murder. All right. We could just go into several other things. We just add stuff, ridiculous stuff like that, like human sacrifice and stuff like that. We could add just that in right there. And he would have to say, yeah, the Bible does regulate it because it says thou shalt not murder. Thou shalt not kill, which is better to say thou shalt not commit murder. See? And so he's automatically allowed it to be regulated. All right? Any questions? So we've attacked that minor premise, haven't we? It's not unregulated because you won't allow us to offer human sacrifices. Okay? So the Bible does regulate it. So it regulates it at least to that extent. And if we go back to our square of opposition, we've got an O-type proposition. Some acts of worship are regulated, are not unregulated. See, they're not unregulated. That means they're regulated. Thou shalt not commit murder. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not commit murder is better translation. See? And the audience can see that right quick. Right now, what Shane was presenting was a good argument too. I'm not knocking that. I'm just saying there might be more than one way to hit this, answer this. Okay. Any questions? So I think both his major and minor premises are flawed. He's assumed it. I think he's begging the question. Conduct which is unregulated by the scriptures. He's begged the question that worship is unregulated. In this minor premise, begs the question. He assumes it. He hadn't proven it. And I just proved it was regulated by you can't commit murder. So we can't use human sacrifice as an act of worship. Okay. Right? So it is regulated. So we falsified his minor premise. That's all we need to do, just falsify one of them. You don't have to attack both of them. Is that clear? Everyone see that?
Mm-hmm.
If his minor premise is not true, even though his argument is valid, it's properly constructed by the rules of logic. His minor premise is not true, therefore his conclusion has not been proven to be true. He might be able to prove it from another argument, but he'd have to give us another argument to prove it. Any questions?
Yes, if I may.
How did Brother Hires answer him? Do you remember?
I would have to go back.
Okay.
It's been a while since I watched it.
Okay. James, did you?
Yes, sir. I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
You said that both the premises were okay.
Their form is okay. I don't mean they're true. I'm saying the form of the argument is true.
Understood. The question I have is, if we reword this, we could say conduct which is not regulated by the scriptures, and then on the minor premise, worship is conduct which is not regulated by the scriptures. Does that in any way change things? In other words, we're negating it.
Yeah, we have we have two negative premises, and that would make it unsound, invalid.
And so if we word it with an unregulated,
it's not the same as a negated premise. Okay. That gets into page 47 of the book, the distribution of terms. And we get into that later in, I can't remember which chapter, but it's not the next chapter. But I think it's a chapter after that. Okay.
Yeah, this is why I'm raising the question, because of the double negative. In a sense, the two statements say the same thing.
Yeah. Yes. But one of them is we have some other processes we're going to learn. Okay. All right.
Okay.
We'll form it. We'll form them. I don't think his form is wrong. I think it's correct. I think it's correct. Unregulated. He apparently knows some logic. Okay, he's framing these things correctly, but of course his premises are false. He's started with the wrong assumptions. Okay, and he does beg the question with his minor premise. Okay. So I'd attack the minor premise. You might attack the major premise too. All right. He is assumed that this is unregulated with his minor premise. And what does it mean by unregulated? So here's a term might need to be dealt with. What do you mean by unregulated in the first place? But if you chase too many rabbits, if you destroy his minor premise, you've taken care of his arguments. If you give him a chance to get off and muddy the water with your attacking the word unregulated, he can muddy the water a bit. So don't do that.
Did we ever state what type of one this is?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just wondering. We did the prior one with AII. Did we ever discuss what this one was?
No, we haven't.
Okay, I didn't think I heard it, but then again.
I think he implies all conduct. I think that's what he would be saying. I want to give him that point, not some conduct. If he's arguing some conduct, then is he saying all worship is conduct which is unregulated? If he says that, if he says some worship is unregulated, see, if he has both of them as some, he doesn't have his middle term distributed. See what we've done?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So his middle term is not distributed. Now, if we go back to page 47 in your notes and look at it, you can see the middle term has to be distributed. Now, here's your middle term: conduct which is unregulated by the scriptures. All right. So if this doesn't have the word all, if all the word, if this is some, right here, this is some conduct. Okay, if he retreats to that, then that middle term is not distributed there. And if this is an A-type proposition, it's not the second part of it is not distributed. Okay, so it's undistributed middle term. That's the fallacy of undistributed middle term. So if he tries to retreat to, I just meant some conduct to get away from your argument. He could argue that the O-type proposition is consistent with the I-type proposition, right? Because they're both subcontraries. They can both be true. So he could say, yeah, you've proven you can't offer human sacrifice, but I just meant some conduct. But if he retreats to that, he has an undistributed middle term, so his argument's invalid that way. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Marion, I got a question.
Yes.
On that major premise, and you hit on kind of what I was thinking. It says conduct which is unregulated. Conduct which is unregulated by the scriptures. So the conclusion is there is some conduct that is regulated by the scriptures. And isn't it up to him to prove that which is regulated instead of unregulated?
Well, I don't know.
You see what I'm saying? Because if it's worded conduct which is unregulated by the scriptures, logically, I think then there is some that which is regulated.
Yeah, that's an automatic implication that some is regulated. I would agree.
And so now it's up to him to prove which is regulated to see if we stand on an even playing ground there before we get into that which is unregulated.
Well,
am I making any sense?
Yes, but if he says some is unregulated, some is regulated, then he's making his major premise to be an I-type proposition.
But wouldn't your argument now switch to proving that which is?
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Say that again, Jeff.
Wouldn't it? So now his argument's going to have to change to prove which is unregulated.
Yes.
I need again. I'm not the shiniest apple in the bag, so now you're going to have to show me proof of what you say.
Yeah, that's why I pointed out we get into discussion of what's regulated and unregulated, and that was the point I made a while ago. So we've got to define what regulated is. But I said,
yes, exactly.
Said I would attack his minor premise and deal with that. And if he tries to retreat away from that, I would say, okay, now you've made your major premise to be an I-type proposition instead of an A. I'll allow you to call it an A, all conduct, which is unregulated. But now, okay, now you haven't defined unregulated. What's it mean to be unregulated? That's your point. Okay, I think. That's the first point I made earlier. That's one. But if we attack his minor premise, and if he tries to retreat and say the major is really an I-type proposition, in order to say this O-type proposition here, which contradicts his minor premise, if all worship is conduct which is unregulated by the scriptures, and of course then I used human sacrifice, and he says, well, I'm just saying some worship is conduct which is unregulated. Now then we get into the question of what's regulated, what's not regulated. How do you know? See what I'm saying? He's completely all mixed up. Okay.
Well, no, because if he would have used the word all, then he would have to encompass the example you gave before of that as sacrifice. Yeah. And he knows he can't put that in there, so he changes the term on it. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, I think he may actually have seen his fallacy here and not be honest enough to admit it. Okay. But we see the problems with it, and this is something you can get into real quickly, right quick. All right. Any more comments or questions? Everybody okay with that? We're pretty close to the end of the hour. We've been going about approximately 45 minutes. Close to. I don't think we can get into the next one. Well, I guess we could. Let's see if we can do the last one of Blakely's arguments.
Did you ever finish defining the other two? The first one you had as an A, and what did you say on the other two?
Well, if he argues all worship, it would be an AAA. All worship is going to, which gives Christians freedom of action. When he argues that premise, that conclusion, when he takes that conclusion, you can falsify it quite easily. If he has AAA, all worship is conduct. He doesn't have the word all in there. So I don't think we can assume anything but some worship and some worship and some worship. If we have all of these as some, it's an I proposition. It's invalid because it doesn't have a distributed middle term. He's got to have an all in there somewhere. And where does it go? If he puts it everywhere, all, puts all right here, then you can falsify that. All worship is conduct which gives Christians freedom of action. Worship would offer human sacrifice. Yep, see, we got a problem there. And of course, Brother Hires used what? What did he use? What did you say?
Incense.
Incense and burning.
Dance, burnt offerings.
Yeah. Okay. So we know that that's not allowed. I think the book of Hebrews would probably rule that out. All right. But okay, I don't know how he responded to Brother Hires, but okay. I listened to the debate and at one time, and I do have the book. I've been to the book several times. Okay. All right. So I think he's got an I proposition, which is invalid. It's not a valid form. All right. But if we are very generous with him and call the first one an A, or the second one an A, an I. Now, I don't think the form I is valid in the figure 1 form. So it has to be, in order to be valid, it has to be an AII or an AAA. Does that make sense?
Yes.
If it has an IAI to have it, he still doesn't distribute his middle term. That's why it's not valid in the figure 1 form. So the only way he could have it valid is an AII or an AAA, because of where his middle term is. His middle term is figure 1. So it'll be an AAA, AII, and we could have an E-type and E-type propositions, but those are not, these are not negatives, okay? All right. Okay, any questions? Now, you might argue that this is the same as not regulated. If you argued that, that would be it would be a form that's, that would be an O-type proposition, okay? I'll make this O. That would be an AO, and that would be figure 1, AO. Nope, won't be valid. Figure 1 won't be valid. So he's stuck with having an AII or an AAA by where he has the middle term. It's figure 1. Okay. Any question? Does that help? We're close enough to the end of the hour. We've been going 50 minutes now. Fellas, I want to, if you don't mind, I want to try some more of these. because I think this is really what we need to get into. Look at these arguments and try to work with them. Let's take Blakely's have an argument next week, Lord willing. Let's get down into the false Stormont debate. And we're gonna, these fellows here don't construct their arguments as in a form quite as well, okay? So be aware of that.
All right.
So that gets into a little problem there. The Thrasher-Welch debate on the baptismal formula. I think it was Keith Thrasher was his name, I think. I think he debated at Oneness Pentecostal here. I think that was who it was. I think his name was Keith. I have some books by him. I can't remember what his first name was. Welch, however, I believe was the Oneness Pentecostal, D.O. Welch. Yeah. All right. I've debated a couple of Oneness Pentecostals. Here's the Conley-Hicks debate on divorce remarriage. Okay. All right. I communicated with them some on that, and we communicated back and forth. I gave some arguments I thought could be used, and he used some of them in the debate. Whether Andrew Conley did. He's passed away now. I don't know. Some of these Alan Hires is getting pretty old. I don't know. We're going to lose him one of these days. All right, I'm getting old too. Huh. Okay. Any questions? All right. I'm going to get out of it. Stop sharing. Oops, I need to